Mara Whitfield's frozen fingers could barely form a fist against the cabin door. Behind her, three small bodies huddled against the Wyoming blizzard that had already claimed feeling in her feet. She'd walked 7 miles through waist-deep snow with a baby strapped to her chest and two children clinging to her skirts, running from a husband who'd sold their home for gambling debts before disappearing into the night. One more door, one more rejection, and they'd all freeze before dawn. The wood was rough under her knuckles as she knocked, praying this stranger wouldn't turn away a desperate woman with nothing left to offer but the truth. If you're watching from somewhere warm tonight, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Mara's story travels. And if you believe in second chances, hit that like button and stay with us until the end. The door opened 6 inches. Firelight spilled across snow that had drifted 3 feet high against the porch. Mara couldn't see the man's face clearly, just a broad silhouette backlit by warmth that felt like a memory from another lifetime. Her mouth tried to form words, but her jaw had gone numb somewhere around mile 5. Please. The word came out broken, barely audible over the wind that tore through the pines surrounding the isolated cabin. My children. She didn't finish. Her knees buckled. The man moved fast for someone his size. His arm caught her before she hit the porch boards, and then he was pulling her inside, shouting something she couldn't quite hear over the roaring in her ears. The warmth hit her like a physical blow. Her legs gave out completely. Get them inside, she managed, gesturing weakly toward the porch where 7-year-old Samuel and 5-year-old Ruth stood frozen, their small faces blue-white in the darkness. Baby Grace was still strapped to Mara's chest, frighteningly quiet inside the cocoon of blankets. The man didn't hesitate. He deposited Mara onto a chair near the fire and went straight back into the storm. Through the open door, she watched him scoop Ruth up with one arm while his other hand found Samuel's shoulder, guiding the boy inside. He kicked the door shut against the wind and stood there for a moment, snow melting off his shoulders, studying the 3 children with an expression Mara was too exhausted to read. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that filled the doorway and hands that looked like they could split logs without an axe. Dark hair fell past his collar, and several days of beard shadowed a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so completely devoid of welcome. He wore homespun wool and leather, and he smelled like wood smoke and pine sap. "They're frozen through," he said. His voice was deep, rough from disuse. "Get those wet clothes off them." Mara tried to stand and couldn't. Her legs had stopped obeying her entirely. "I can't. My hands." He looked at her for a long moment, then moved toward Ruth, who shrank back against the wall. "I'm not going to hurt you," he told the little girl, "but you'll lose those fingers if we don't get you warm, understand?" Ruth's terrified eyes found Mara's face. "It's all right, sweetheart," Mara whispered, though nothing about this was all right. They were at the mercy of a stranger in the middle of nowhere, with no way to leave and no strength left to defend themselves if mercy wasn't on offer. "Let him help." The man worked with surprising gentleness, peeling away Ruth's frozen coat and dress, wrapping her in a thick wool blanket before turning to Samuel. The boy had stopped shivering entirely, never a good sign. His lips had gone gray. "Can you talk?" the man asked Samuel. Samuel nodded, but no words came out. "That's all right. Don't try." He wrapped the boy in another blanket and carried both children closer to the fire, settling them on a bearskin rug. Then he turned to Mara. "The baby." Mara's frozen fingers fumbled with the knots holding Grace against her chest. The man waited approximately 3 seconds before stepping forward and cutting the cloth with a knife that appeared from somewhere in his belt. He caught the baby as the fabric fell away. Grace didn't cry, didn't move. Her tiny face was the color of old snow. Something shifted in the man's expression, the first real emotion Mara had seen there. His large hands cradled Grace against his chest as he carried her to the fire, and when he unwrapped the blankets, his movements became even more careful. He touched the baby's cheek, her hands, the soft spot on her head, checking things Mara was too frightened to understand. "She's breathing," he said finally. "Heart's strong, but she's too cold. We need skin contact. It's fastest." He looked at Mara. "Can you sit up?" She tried, failed. The room tilted sideways. "Right." He made a decision quickly. "Samuel, Ruth, you two stay by that fire and don't move. Understand?" Both children nodded, huddled together under their blankets like small animals in a burrow. The man carried Grace to a bed in the corner of the cabin, the only bed, Mara realized, and tucked her under thick furs. Then he unbuttoned his shirt, lay down, and placed the baby against his bare chest before pulling the furs up over them both. Grace's tiny body disappeared against the breadth of him. "She needs her mother's warmth," Mara protested weakly. "Her mother can't stand up," he replied, matter of fact. "And this baby needs warmth now, not in 5 minutes after you've recovered enough to hold her." His eyes met Mara's. "You can trust me or not, that's your choice, but I've raised enough orphaned animals to know hypothermia when I see it." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to demand her baby back, but Grace's life mattered more than pride, and the truth was she could barely keep her own eyes open. The warmth of the fire was pulling her under like deep water. "What's your name?" she asked, fighting to stay conscious. "Caleb Rowe." "I'm Mara Whitfield. That's Samuel, Ruth, and Grace." He nodded once. "There's coffee in the pot. Drink it if you can. Otherwise sleep. You're safe here." She wanted to ask how he could promise such a thing when the world had proven otherwise for so long. But exhaustion won, dragging her down into darkness while her children breathed in the warmth of a stranger's mercy. When Mara opened her eyes, weak daylight filtered through a single window. The storm still raged outside, but inside the cabin, everything was quiet except for the crackle of the fire. She was lying on the floor near the hearth, covered with blankets she didn't remember pulling over herself. Grace. Panic shot through her. She sat up too fast and the room spun. But there, across the cabin, Caleb Rowe sat in a wooden chair with Grace cradled in one arm, feeding her something from a cup using a small piece of cloth as a makeshift nipple. The baby was sucking weakly, but definitely alive, her small fist curled against Caleb's shirt. Ruth and Samuel were still asleep on the bearskin rug, tangled together under their blankets. "She woke hungry an hour ago," Caleb said without looking up. "Goat's milk. It's what I have." Mara's breasts ached with milk she hadn't been able to express in days, her body too depleted to produce enough. "She'll take it?" "Seems to." He adjusted Grace carefully. "She's a fighter." Mara pushed herself to her feet, steadier now, and crossed to him. He handed Grace over without protest, and Mara settled into the chair he vacated, putting the baby to her breast. Grace latched immediately, her little body already warmer, already stronger than she'd been in days. "Thank you." The words felt inadequate. "You saved her life. All our lives." Caleb moved to the fire, adding wood with his back to her. "Coffee's still hot. Food's in the larder if you're hungry. Storm won't break for another day at least, so you'll be here a while." It wasn't exactly a welcome, but it wasn't a dismissal either. Mara studied his back, the set of his shoulders, the careful way he didn't look at her. "You live here alone," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "And you're not happy about guests?" His hand stilled on the wood. "Didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Mara adjusted Grace, who was nursing contentedly now. "But I'm grateful anyway. When the storm clears, we'll leave. I promise we won't impose longer than necessary." He turned then, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 35, 40 at most. Hard years, though. They'd carved lines around his eyes and mouth, and there was something in his expression that recognized the same hardness in her. "Where will you go?" he asked. "South Fork, there's a boarding house there. The owner knew my mother. That's 40 miles through mountain passes that won't be clear until spring. Then we'll wait for spring." "In South Fork?" "Here." The word came out more desperately than she intended. "If you'll allow it, I can work. I can cook, clean, mend. Samuel's good with animals. We won't be dead weight. I swear it." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then at Ruth and Samuel, still sleeping, then at Grace, nursing peacefully in her mother's arms. "Storm's getting worse," he said finally. "We'll talk about it when it clears." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Mara held her baby closer and decided that would have to be enough. No. The storm lasted 3 days. On the first day, they barely spoke. Caleb went about his routines, feeding the fire, checking his stores, tending to 3 goats in a small barn attached to the back of the cabin. Mara focused on keeping her children warm and fed, watching their color return, their breathing even out. Samuel's frostbitten fingers were wrapped in cloth soaked with something that smelled like herbs. Ruth clung to her mother's skirts, but stopped flinching every time Caleb moved. Grace was the bravest of them all. She seemed to have decided that Caleb's broad chest was a perfectly acceptable substitute for her mother's arms, and when Mara tried to take her back after a feeding, the baby fussed until Caleb picked her up again. Something about his heartbeat, maybe, or his warmth, or the rumble of his voice when he spoke to the goats. "She likes you," Mara said, watching him walk Grace in a slow circle around the cabin while the baby stared up at his bearded face with fascination. "Babies don't know enough to be particular yet," Caleb replied. But his hand was gentle on Grace's back, and Mara noticed he'd started talking to the baby in low tones while he worked. Nothing important, just observations about the wood grain, the weather, the way the wind sounded in the pines, as if Grace's presence had unlocked something in him that had been shut for a very long time. On the second day, Ruth found her voice. "Mr. Caleb?" she asked from her spot by the fire, where she'd been watching him carve something from a piece of wood. "What are you making?" He held up the half-formed shape. "Can you tell?" Ruth studied it seriously. "A horse?" "Close. A deer. I like deer. Mama says they're gentle." "They are," Caleb agreed. "Until they're not. Even gentle things will fight if you back them into a corner." His eyes flicked to Mara as he said it, and she felt the weight of understanding pass between them. He'd recognized what she was running from even if he didn't know the details. There were only so many reasons a woman showed up half-frozen with 3 children and nothing else. Samuel spoke for the first time that afternoon. "Sir, can I help with the goats?" Caleb considered him. "You know anything about animals?" "Some. We had chickens. Before." The word hung in the air. Before. Before whatever had shattered their lives and driven them into the mountains. "All right," Caleb said. "Come on then." He led Samuel through the door that connected to the barn, and Mara heard the low rumble of Caleb's voice explaining how much to feed, where to find the fresh hay, how to check for illness. Samuel's lighter voice asked questions, good questions, thoughtful ones, and Caleb answered each with the same careful patience he'd shown Grace. Ruth leaned against Mara's side. "Is Mr. Caleb going to be our papa now?" The question punched through Mara's chest. "No, sweetheart. Mr. Caleb is being kind to us. But he's not our family." "Papa wasn't kind," Ruth said simply. "Papa was mean, and then he left." "I know. I like Mr. Caleb better." Mara pulled her daughter closer, feeling the ache of too many truths she couldn't explain. "I like him better too." On the third day, the storm finally broke. Caleb stood at the window watching dawn break over mountains that looked like they'd been carved from white stone. Mara joined him, Grace sleeping in her arms. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's dangerous." He gestured to the passes beyond the tree line. "Those routes won't be clear for months, and even if they were, you couldn't make the trip with children, not until spring. Then we'll go to South Fork when spring comes." "South Fork's 40 miles. "You said that already." "I'm saying it again so you understand what you're agreeing to." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his expression made her breath catch. "Staying here means staying here. Through winter. Through whatever comes with it. This cabin's small, privacy's limited, and I'm not easy company." "Neither am I," Mara replied. "But I can work. I promise you won't regret." "It's not about regret." He cut her off, frustrated. "It's about reality. You don't know me. I don't know you. And there are things—" He stopped himself, jaw tight. "There are reasons I live alone." "Because you want to, or because something made you?" His eyes went hard. "Does it matter?" "Yes." Mara shifted Grace to her other arm. "Because if you want to be alone, we'll leave as soon as it's safe, and I'll thank you for your kindness. But if you're alone because you think it's what you deserve, then maybe we're more alike than you realize." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Ruth's soft singing to the wooden deer Caleb had finished carving. 2 months, Caleb said finally. "Until the first thaw. Then we talk about South Fork again." Relief flooded through Mara so completely she had to close her eyes. 2 months. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. But there was something different in his voice, something that sounded almost like hope. You haven't seen how bad my temper gets when I'm stuck inside too long. You haven't seen mine either, Mara replied. The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. They fell into routine slowly, carefully, like two wild animals learning to share territory. Caleb rose before dawn and tended the goats. Mara woke when Grace cried and started the coffee. Samuel helped with the animals, his frostbitten fingers healing well enough to handle the smaller tasks. Ruth swept the floor and sang songs she made up about deer and mountains and snow that fell like feathers. Mara cooked from Caleb's stores, dried beans, salt pork, cornmeal, wild onions. She mended his shirts where the seams had split and patched his socks with yarn she unraveled from a blanket he said he didn't need. She learned that he liked his coffee black and strong, that he ate standing up unless forced to sit, and that he went silent when the wind picked up, staring out the window at something only he could see. In return, Caleb taught Samuel how to split kindling properly, showed Ruth how to card wool from the goats, and spent hours walking Grace around the cabin in the evening when the baby fussed. He carved more animals, a rabbit for Ruth, a bear for Samuel, a tiny bird for Grace that Mara hung over the bed. They didn't talk about before, not at first. But on the 9th night, after the children had fallen asleep, and Mara sat mending by the fire while Caleb worked on a piece of leather harness, she asked the question she'd been holding back. Why did you let us in? His hand stilled. You knocked. People don't always answer when someone knocks. I answered. Why? Caleb set down the leather and stared into the fire. Because I knew what would happen if I didn't. The words carried weight, heavy, old weight that had nothing to do with Mara and her children. You've seen people freeze before, she said quietly. My sister. The admission came out flat, emotionless. 12 years ago. She was trying to reach the next settlement in a storm. I found her 3 days later, a quarter mile from safety. Mara's chest tightened. I'm sorry. She knocked on 6 doors before she gave up. His jaw worked. 6. People heard her. They didn't answer. Too dangerous to open the door in a storm. Too risky to trust strangers. So she died alone in the snow, and I buried her, and I came up here where I wouldn't have to look at any of those doors again. And then we knocked on yours. And then you knocked on mine. He looked at her finally. I couldn't leave you out there. Any of you. Even if it meant... He stopped, shaking his head. It doesn't matter. Even if it meant what? Breaking my own rules. Mara set down her mending. What rules? No people, no attachments, no risk of caring about someone enough that losing them would destroy what's left of me. His voice was raw now, stripped of the careful control he usually maintained. I learned my lesson when Caroline died. I'm not built for loss, so I built this instead. He gestured to the cabin. The solitude, the isolation, the safety of complete disconnection. But you let us in anyway, Mara said. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. Not for me. He met her eyes. Not when I heard your children crying. Not when I saw... He stopped again, something vulnerable flickering across his face before he locked it down. You should sleep. Morning comes early. It was a dismissal, a retreat behind the walls he'd built. Mara let him have it, for now. But as she lay down beside her children that night, listening to Caleb's breathing slow in the chair where he'd taken to sleeping so she and the children could have the bed, she understood something fundamental about the man who'd saved them. He wasn't hiding from the world. He was hiding from himself, from his own capacity to care, from the devastating knowledge that love and loss were two sides of the same coin, and he decided the only way to avoid one was to refuse the other entirely. The problem with that philosophy, Mara thought, was that care wasn't something you could turn off like a spigot. And Caleb Rowe, whether he admitted it or not, had already started caring. Just 2 weeks into their stay, Ruth got sick. It started with a cough, nothing alarming at first. But by the second day, fever set in, and by the third, she was struggling to breathe. Mara tried everything she knew, steam from hot water, compresses, keeping Ruth upright, But the little girl's lips were turning blue around the edges, and her small chest heaved with each breath. "It's in her lungs," Caleb said, crouching beside the bed where Ruth lay limp and burning. "Pneumonia, most likely." Terror gripped Mara's throat. "What do we do?" "There's a herb that helps. Mountain root. It grows on the north faces, under the snow. Can you find it?" "Maybe." He stood, already reaching for his coat. "But I'll have to dig, and the drifts are 12 feet deep in places. It could take hours." "Then go, please." He looked at her, really looked, seeing the desperation that had driven her through a storm to his door. "If I don't come back, you'll come back. Mara, you'll come back because that little girl in that bed trusts you, because she calls you Mr. Caleb like you're something good and safe in a world that's been neither. And because I know you, Caleb Rowe. You don't break promises, even the ones you don't make out loud." Something shifted in his face. "Watch her breathing. If it gets worse, if she stops responding, you—" He shook his head. "Just keep her comfortable." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with the finality of a coffin lid. Samuel pressed against Mara's side. "Is Ruth going to die?" "No." Mara pulled him close, lying through her teeth because the truth would break him. "Mr. Caleb will find the medicine. She'll be fine." But Ruth's breathing grew more labored as the hours passed. Her fever spiked. She cried out in her delirium, calling for her father, not Victor, but some imagined version who'd never existed, some father who loved her and stayed. Grace wailed, sensing the fear in the cabin. Samuel cried silently, holding his sister's hand, and Mara prayed to anyone who might be listening that Caleb Rowe was as stubborn as he seemed, that he wouldn't give up, that he'd come back. The sun was setting when the door finally opened. Caleb stumbled inside, covered in snow up to his shoulders, his face raw from wind and cold. He carried a bundle of roots still crusted with ice, and his hands were shaking as he moved immediately to the fire, heating water and grinding the roots into a paste. "Hold her head up," he instructed. Mara obeyed, cradling Ruth's limp body while Caleb spooned the bitter mixture into her mouth. Ruth coughed, sputtered, tried to turn away. "I know it tastes like hell," Caleb told her, his voice gentle. "But you've got to swallow, Ruth. For me. Can you do that?" Ruth's glassy eyes found his face. She swallowed. "Good girl." Again. He fed her the entire mixture in patient increments, then wrapped her in blankets and settled beside the bed, his large hand resting on her small back, monitoring every breath. "Go sleep," he told Mara. "I'll watch her." "I can't. You're no good to any of them if you collapse. Sleep. I'll wake you if anything changes." Mara wanted to argue, but exhaustion had her by the throat, and Ruth was breathing easier already, and Caleb's presence felt like a promise that he wouldn't let the little girl slip away in the night. So she slept, and dreamed of doors that opened, of strangers who became something more. When she woke, Caleb was still there, his hand still on Ruth's back, his eyes red-rimmed from a night without sleep. But Ruth's fever had broken, her breathing was steady, and when she opened her eyes, she smiled up at Caleb with absolute trust. "You came back," she whispered. Caleb's throat worked. "Of course I did. Papa never came back." "I'm not him," Caleb said quietly, "and I don't make promises I can't keep." Ruth closed her eyes again, already falling back asleep, safe and healing. Mara met Caleb's gaze across the bed. No words passed between them, but something settled into place. Something fragile and terrifying and undeniably real. This wasn't temporary anymore, and they both knew it. Winter deepened and the cabin shrank around them, not in space, but in distance. The careful boundaries they'd maintained began to dissolve. Caleb taught Samuel how to trap rabbits and skin them properly. Ruth braided leather strips into bracelets for everyone, including one for Caleb that he wore without comment. Grace reached for Caleb's face whenever he came near, her tiny fingers tangling in his beard while she babbled nonsense that made him smile despite himself. And Mara. Mara learned the careful geography of a man who'd convinced himself he was better off alone. She learned that he woke with nightmares sometimes, gasping for air like he was drowning, that he went silent on the anniversary of his sister's death and stood at the window for hours, staring at nothing, that he'd built this cabin with his own hands after burying Caroline log by log, as if physical labor could fill the hole she'd left behind. She learned that he was kind, unbearably kind, in ways he didn't seem to recognize about himself. "Why do you look at me like that?" he asked one evening, catching her watching him show Samuel how to tie a proper knot. "Like what?" "Like I'm something I'm not." "You're exactly what I think you are," Mara replied. "You just don't see it yet." "And what do you think I am?" "Good." The word came out simple, honest. "Despite everything that's happened to you, you're still good." Caleb's expression shuddered. "You don't know everything that's happened to me." "Then tell me." For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't. But then Samuel finished the knot successfully, and Caleb ruffled the boy's hair with genuine pride, and the walls came down just enough. "After Caroline died, I didn't handle it well." His voice was low, meant only for her. "I blamed everyone. The people who didn't answer her knocks, the storm. Myself for not going after her sooner. I said things I shouldn't have. Did things I regret." "What kind of things?" "The kind that destroy communities." He stared at his hands. "I called them cowards, murderers. I stood in the town square and told them all exactly what I thought of their fear. And then I left, because I couldn't stand to look at them anymore. Or myself." "That doesn't make you bad." "Doesn't make me good either." "Caleb," she waited until he looked at her. "You walked through 12-foot drifts to find medicine for a child who isn't yours. You gave up your bed, your food, your peace for people you didn't know and didn't owe anything to. You're the best man I've met in a very long time." His eyes held hers, searching for deception and finding none. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect?" "Someone weaker, someone who'd need rescuing." Mara laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I'm the last person who needs rescuing. I spent 8 years married to a man who drank away everything we had and told me I was lucky he stayed, who hit Samuel for crying and locked Ruth in the cellar when she misbehaved, who disappeared the day after Grace was born and took every cent we had with him." Her voice hardened. "I don't need rescuing, Caleb. I needed safety. A door that would open, a place where my children could be children instead of targets." "You got out," he said quietly. "I got out. And if I'd known where that road led, I'd have left years ago. But I believed—" She stopped, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter what I believed. It matters. Why?" "Because I want to understand." The admission seemed to cost him something. "I want to understand what makes a woman walk through a blizzard with 3 children and no supplies. What makes her knock on a stranger's door and risk everything on the possibility of mercy." Mara looked at Ruth and Samuel, playing with Grace near the fire, their laughter bright and unbroken in the warm cabin. "Love," she said simply. "Love makes you brave enough to bet everything on hope, even when hope feels foolish." Caleb's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded flickering across his face before he locked it away again. But Mara had seen it, and she knew, with the certainty of someone who'd been broken and rebuilt, that Caleb Rowe was falling. Not just for her children, but for the possibility that isolation wasn't the only way to survive grief. That maybe, just maybe, there was another way. The day Victor Hale arrived, the sky was sharp and blue. Mara heard the horses first, multiple riders coming up the trail. Caleb was outside splitting wood, and she watched through the window as he set down the axe and turned toward the sound, his entire body going still. Samuel and Ruth were helping her braid rope from dried grass. Grace slept in the cradle Caleb had built, small fists curled under her chin. "Mara," Caleb's voice carried through the door. "Take the children to the back room, now." Her heart dropped. "What?" "Now." She didn't argue. She gathered Ruth and Samuel, scooped Grace from the cradle, and ushered them into the small storage room at the back of the cabin. "Stay here. Stay quiet, no matter what you hear." "Mama," "No matter what." She closed the door and returned to find Caleb standing in the middle of the cabin, the axe in his hand, his expression colder than she'd ever seen it. "Get behind me," he said. Mara moved to stand beside him instead. "If this is who I think it is, then you stay behind me." The door opened without a knock. 3 men walked in like they owned the place. The first was tall and thin with the kind of face that smiled too easily. The second was broad and scarred. The third was Victor. Her husband looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a careless way with hair that curled at his collar and eyes that could charm or cut depending on his mood. He wore a coat that cost more than Mara had seen in 6 months, and his boots were polished to a high shine. His gaze found her immediately, and his smile was pure poison. "Mara, sweetheart, you've led me on quite the chase." Caleb's grip tightened on the axe handle. "This is private property. You're not welcome." Victor's eyes slid from Mara to Caleb, assessment sharp and calculating beneath the affable surface. "And you are?" "The man telling you to leave." "Interesting." Victor took a step further inside, his companions flanking him like hunting dogs. "Because the woman you're harboring is my wife, and those children hiding in your back room are mine, which makes this very much my business." Mara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "You gave up any claim to us when you abandoned us without food or shelter in the middle of winter." "Abandoned?" Victor laughed, the sound light and amused. "Sweetheart, I went to secure our future. The opportunities in Denver were too good to pass up. I always intended to send for you." "You sold our house, took everything we had." "Investments require capital, Mara. You've never understood business." He spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness that made her stomach turn. "But I'm here now. I've come to bring my family home." "We're not going anywhere with you," Samuel said. Mara's heart stopped. She turned to find her son standing in the doorway of the back room, his small body rigid with fear and defiance. Ruth appeared behind him, clutching Grace against her chest. "Samuel, go back!" "No, Mama." Samuel's voice shook but held. "He left us. He doesn't get to come back and pretend like nothing happened." Victor's expression shifted, the charm sliding away like a mask. "Boy, you'll speak respectfully to your father." "You're not my father, not anymore." The scarred man moved, hand dropping to the gun at his hip. Caleb shifted faster, putting himself between the children and the threat. The axe came up, casual but unmistakable. "Touch that pistol, and you'll lose the hand," Caleb said quietly. "I don't care what law you think you've got on your side." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Is that what this is? You're playing house with my family, mountain man, thinking you can keep what's mine?" "They're not yours." Caleb's voice was flat, final. "They haven't been yours since the moment you walked away and left them to freeze. The law says different. The law says a man has rights to his wife and children. The law says—" Victor pulled a folded paper from his coat. "That I'm within my authority to reclaim my property. This here's a writ from the territorial marshal, signed and legal." He held up the document and Mara felt the floor shift beneath her. Property. He'd called them property. "Let me see that," she said. Victor handed it over with a smile that said he'd already won. Mara unfolded the paper with trembling hands and read words that burned like acid. Abandonment denied, paternal rights affirmed, return of minor children mandated by law. "You lied," she whispered. "You told them I left you." "I told them the truth as I understand it." Victor's smile widened. "That my wife grew melancholy after the birth of our daughter. That I woke one morning to find her gone, the children with her. That I've been searching desperately for months, worried sick about their safety. That's not— Can you prove otherwise?" He gestured around the cabin. "You're living in the wilderness with a strange man, no witnesses, no one to vouch for your version of events. While I have friends in Denver, business associates, people who'll testify to my character and my concern for my missing family." Mara's hands clenched on the paper. "I won't let you take them." "You don't have a choice." Victor's tone turned sharp, businesslike. "The children are coming with me. You can come willingly and resume your duties as a wife, or you can stay here with your mountain man and forfeit any claim to them at all. Your choice." Ruth made a small broken sound. Samuel moved in front of his sisters, his thin shoulders squared like a soldier facing battle. And Grace reached her small hands toward Caleb, whimpering. Caleb looked at Mara. In his eyes, she saw the same calculation she was making. 3 armed men, 1 axe, children in the crossfire. No way to win through violence without risking everything that mattered. How much? Caleb asked. Victor blinked. Excuse me? How much to leave them alone? Name your price. They're not for sale. Everything's for sale with men like you. Caleb's contempt was absolute. You didn't come back because you care. You came back because you need something. Money, leverage, a way to save face after running out on your responsibilities. So name your price and get out. Victor's jaw tightened. For a moment, the mask slipped completely, and Mara saw the mean, petty man underneath, the one who'd hit Samuel for spilling milk, who'd locked Ruth in the dark, who told Mara she was worthless except for what she could provide. You think you can buy my family? Victor asked softly. I think you already sold them. I'm just offering to make it official. The scarred man's hand moved again toward his gun. The thin man shifted his weight, ready. And Victor smiled the way a snake smiles before striking. Here's what's going to happen, he said. The children are leaving with me. Today. You can fight it, and I'll have the marshal come up here with enough men to burn this cabin to splinters. Or you can accept reality and let them go peacefully. Either way, they're mine. Mama, no! Ruth's voice broke on a sob. Samuel grabbed Mara's hand, his grip desperate. Don't let him take us, please. And Grace was crying now, reaching for Caleb with both arms, her small face crumpled with fear. Mara felt something crack in her chest. She'd walked through a blizzard to save her children. She'd risked everything for their safety. And now this man who'd given them nothing but pain was going to take them away because the law said he could. 3 days, she said. Victor frowned. What? Give me 3 days to say goodbye, to prepare them. You've got your writ, you've got your legal claim. But if you have any humanity left, give me 3 days before you tear their world apart again. Mara, Caleb's voice carried a warning, but she kept her eyes on Victor, watching him weigh the cost of mercy against his need to win completely. 2 days, Victor said finally, and if you run, I'll hunt you down and make sure you never see them again. Understand? Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. Victor gestured to his men. We'll be at the settlement, 10 miles down the mountain. I'll return in 2 days, and those children better be ready to travel. He looked at Caleb. And you, mountain man, if you interfere, I'll make sure you hang for kidnapping, legal and proper. He swept out, his companions following. The door closed behind them, and the sound of horses faded down the trail. Silence filled the cabin like water filling a drowning man's lungs. Ruth was crying. Samuel stood frozen, his hand still clutching Mara's. Grace wailed, inconsolable, and when Caleb reached for her, she grabbed his shirt and buried her face in his neck. Mama? Samuel's voice was very small. Are we really going back to him? Mara knelt in front of her son, her hands framing his face. No, we're not. But he said, I know what he said, and I know what the law says. But I will not let that man hurt you again. I swear it. How? Ruth asked through her tears. How can we stop him if the law says he's right? Mara looked at Caleb, who was pacing the cabin like a caged wolf, Grace still clinging to him. His expression was murderous. I don't know yet, Mara admitted. But we have 2 days to figure it out. Caleb stopped pacing. There might be a way. What way? He set Grace down carefully, then crossed to a small chest in the corner of the cabin. When he opened it, Mara saw papers, old documents, letters, things he'd kept despite claiming to want no ties to his past. Marriage, he said, pulling out a paper. If you were married to someone else, Victor's claim would be contested. Mara's heart stuttered. What? Territorial law recognizes marriage contracts. If we were legally married, he couldn't just take the children. He'd have to prove abandonment or unfitness, and with witnesses saying you've been here all winter, stable and caring for them properly, Caleb shook his head. It's not perfect, but it's something. You're talking about marrying me to save my children from my husband, ex-husband, if you marry me. The absurdity of it hit her sideways. Caleb, you can't just marry someone to, why not? His eyes were fierce. You need protection. They need protection. This gives it to you. For how long? Until Victor leaves? Until spring? And then what? We just annul it and pretend it never happened? If that's what you want? What about what you want? Caleb looked at her for a long moment. At Ruth, who'd stopped crying to listen. At Samuel, whose expression held desperate hope. At Grace, who was pulling herself up on the edge of the chair, babbling at them both. "What I want," he said slowly, "is for those children to be safe. Everything else is secondary." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have right now." Mara pressed her hands to her face, trying to think through the panic that wanted to swallow her whole. Marriage. To Caleb. It was insane. It was desperate. It was the only option that gave them a chance. "Would it work?" she asked. "Legally?" "There's a preacher in the settlement. He could perform the ceremony, file the papers with the territorial office. It would be binding. And Victor would just accept it? Victor would have to challenge it in court, which takes time. Time you'd spend as my legal wife with the children under my protection." Caleb's voice gentled. "I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying it's a shield. And right now, you need one." Ruth tugged on Mara's skirt. "Does this mean Mr. Caleb would really be our papa?" The question hung in the air, innocent and devastating. "Ruth, sweetheart, it's more complicated," Mara started. "Would he?" Ruth insisted. "Because I want him to be. I want to stay here where it's safe, and Mr. Caleb tells us stories and nobody yells." "Me too," Samuel said quietly. "I know it's pretend. I know he's just being nice, but I'd rather pretend with him than be real with Papa Victor." Mara looked at Caleb helplessly. "They don't understand what they're asking." "Don't they?" Caleb crouched down to Ruth's level. "Ruth, if I did this, if I married your mama, it would mean I'd be responsible for all of you, for keeping you safe and fed and warm, for teaching you things and making sure you grow up right. That's a big responsibility. You understand?" Ruth nodded seriously. "Would you hit us if we were bad?" The question landed like a physical blow. Caleb's expression went very still. "No, I would never hit you, any of you." "Then I want you to be our papa," Ruth said, "because real papas aren't supposed to hit. They're supposed to be like you." Caleb's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened, Mara saw something raw and unguarded there. Grief and longing and a kind of desperate hope that mirrored her own. "We should talk about this alone," Mara said. "Children, go play with Grace. Stay in the cabin." Once they were occupied, she turned to Caleb. "You don't have to do this. I know. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment you knocked on my door." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "I'm not doing this out of obligation, Mara. I'm doing it because those children deserve better than Victor Hale, and because you deserve a choice. Real protection. Not just hoping the law will suddenly care about justice. But marriage. Caleb, it's forever. Even if we annul it later, it's still... Forever is negotiable," he interrupted. "Safety isn't, and right now, safety requires marriage. So we get married, we file the papers, and we show Victor Hale that his legal claim isn't as solid as he thinks. What if it doesn't work? Then we try something else. What if he comes back with more men? Then I deal with it. What if..." Her voice broke. "What if you regret it? Tying yourself to someone else's problems, giving up your peace for children who aren't yours?" Caleb caught her chin gently, tilting her face up. "Those children have been mine since the moment Grace curled up against my chest and decided to live. Since Samuel asked to help with the goats. Since Ruth gave me a leather bracelet and told me I was nicer than her papa." His thumb brushed her jaw. "I'm already tied to you, all of you. This just makes it legal." Mara felt tears burning in her throat. "I can't ask you to be..." "You're not asking. I'm offering." His eyes searched hers. "Do you trust me?" "Yes." "Then trust me to mean what I say. 2 days from now, Victor comes back. Let him find a woman with a legal husband and a home, not a runaway hiding in the mountains. Let him find resistance instead of fear." It was reckless, possibly foolish, the kind of desperate gamble that either saved everything or destroyed it completely. Mara thought of Ruth's question, of Samuel's quiet acceptance, of Grace reaching for Caleb like he was safety made solid. "All right," she whispered. "We get married." Something shifted in Caleb's expression, relief, maybe, or something deeper that he wouldn't let himself name. "Tomorrow," he said. We ride to the settlement at first light. The preacher can perform the ceremony, we file the papers, and we're back before dark. And then? And then we see if a piece of paper is enough to stop a man like Victor Hale. Mara wasn't sure it would be, but for the first time since that door opened, she had something stronger than fear. She had an ally, a partner, someone willing to stand between her children and the man who'd hurt them. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was enough. It had to be. That night, sleep was impossible. Mara lay beside her children, listening to their breathing even out while her mind raced. Across the cabin, Caleb sat by the fire, sharpening his knife with slow, methodical strokes that suggested his thoughts were just as turbulent. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. "No. Neither can I." Mara sat up carefully, not wanting to wake the children. She crossed to the fire and settled on the floor beside Caleb's chair, drawing her knees up and wrapping her arms around them. "I keep thinking about what happens if this doesn't work," she admitted. "If Victor finds some way around the marriage, some legal loophole that lets him take them anyway, then we go to plan B." "What's plan B?" Caleb's knife stilled. "Whatever it has to be." The implications in those words were dark and serious. Mara looked at him, really looked, and saw the truth written in the set of his shoulders, the hardness in his eyes. "You'd kill him," she said. Not a question. "If it came to it, yes. And hang for it, if necessary." "Caleb, I'm not a good man, Mara." His voice was quiet but absolute. "I'm not the kind of man who stands by while children suffer. I lost Caroline because people chose safety over compassion. I won't lose—" He stopped, jaw tight. "I won't let Victor Hale walk out of here with those children. Not alive. Not if every other option fails." Mara should have been horrified. Should have argued, pleaded, told him that violence wasn't the answer. Instead, she felt something loosen in her chest, the constant, exhausting fear that she was alone in this, that when push came to shove, she'd have to choose between her children's safety and her own survival. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb looked at her sharply. "For what?" "For meaning it. For being willing to do what I can't. To be what they need." His expression softened slightly. "You're stronger than you think." "I'm terrified." "Terrified isn't the same as weak. You walked through a blizzard. You chose your children over everything else, including your own life. That's not weakness. It doesn't feel like strength. It never does. Not when you're in the middle of it." He set the knife aside. "My sister was terrified when she left. I found her journal after we buried her. She wrote about the fear, about how every step felt impossible. But she kept going anyway, trying to reach help, trying to survive." "You blame yourself," Mara said quietly. "Every day. It wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" His laugh was bitter. "I knew the settlement was dangerous, knew they didn't take kindly to strangers. I should have gone with her, should have protected her." "You can't protect everyone from everything." "I can try." He looked at her. "And I can make damn sure history doesn't repeat itself." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. "What was she like?" Mara asked. "Caroline?" Caleb's expression went distant. "Stubborn, smart. She wanted to be a teacher, had all these ideas about education and reform. She used to argue with me about everything, politics, philosophy, whether coffee was better black or with cream." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "She was the only person who could make me laugh when I was furious. She sounds wonderful." She was. The smile faded. "And she deserved better than dying alone in the snow because I wasn't there to save her." "Caleb, I know what you're going to say. That it wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have known. But knowing doesn't change the fact that she died alone and afraid. And I live with that, every day." Mara reached out slowly and took his hand. His fingers were rough, calloused from work and weather, and they closed around hers with careful pressure. "You're a good man," she said. "Caroline would be proud of who you became." "I became a hermit. You became someone who opens doors, who risks everything for strangers, who carves wooden animals for frightened children and walks through snowdrifts to find medicine. She squeezed his hand. You're exactly the kind of man she'd want protecting people. Caleb's throat worked. I don't know how to do this. Be a husband, a father. I'm not built for it. Neither am I. I failed at marriage once already. You didn't fail. He did. I stayed. For 8 years I stayed and told myself it would get better. That's its own kind of failure. It's survival, Caleb corrected. And you left when it mattered most, when your children needed you to be brave instead of safe. That's not failure. Mara felt tears sting her eyes. I'm scared this won't work, that tomorrow we'll stand in front of a preacher and say vows that don't mean anything, and it still won't be enough to stop him. Then we'll find another way. What if there isn't one? There's always another way. His grip tightened on her hand. I promise you, Mara, I will not let that man hurt your children, not while I'm breathing. It should have sounded like bravado, empty promises from someone who couldn't possibly guarantee what he was offering. But Mara believed him, because Caleb Rowe didn't make promises he couldn't keep. And when he looked at her children, she saw the same fierce protectiveness she felt, the kind that would burn the world down before letting harm through the door. We should sleep, she said finally. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Tomorrow's going to change everything, Caleb agreed. But he didn't let go of her hand, and Mara didn't pull away. They sat together by the fire while the night deepened around them. Two people who'd chosen solitude, learning how to be something else. Not lovers, not yet, but partners, allies. Two people willing to fight for something worth protecting. And in the morning, they'd make it legal. In the morning, they'd stand together against a man who thought power and law made him untouchable. In the morning, everything would change. But tonight they had each other's hands and the quiet certainty that they weren't alone anymore. And sometimes that was enough. Dawn broke cold and clear over the mountains. Mara woke to find Caleb already dressed, saddling 2 horses in the small corral behind the cabin. She'd slept maybe 2 hours, her dreams full of courtrooms and locked doors, and Victor's smile turning sharp as a blade. Samuel was awake too, watching through the window with worried eyes. Are you really going to marry him, Mama? Yes. What if Papa Victor gets angry? Then he gets angry. Mara pulled her son close. But we're not going back to him. I swear it. Ruth stirred in the bed, Grace cradled against her chest. The little girl had developed a habit of sleeping pressed against her sister, like she was afraid of being separated in the night. Mara understood the feeling. Samuel, I need you to stay here with Ruth and Grace, Mara said. Keep the fire going. Don't open the door for anyone except me or Caleb. Understand? Fear flickered across his face. What if Papa comes? He won't. Not today. He's waiting at the settlement. But what if... Samuel... She gripped his shoulders. You're brave. You've always been brave. I need you to be brave for a few more hours while we fix this. Can you do that? He nodded, trying to match her courage with his own. Mara kissed his forehead, then Ruth's, then Grace's soft hair. Then she wrapped herself in her warmest shawl and walked out into the morning that would change everything. Caleb handed her the reins of the smaller horse without speaking. His expression was closed, unreadable in the weak light. He'd shaved, she noticed, and tied his hair back. He looked almost civilized, though there was nothing civilized about the gun belt strapped around his waist or the knife sheathed at his hip. You armed yourself, she observed. It's a long ride. You think we'll need weapons? I think it pays to be prepared. He swung up onto his horse with easy grace. You ready? No, Mara thought, but she mounted anyway, settling into the saddle with hands that only shook a little. They rode in silence down the mountain trail. Snow still covered everything, pristine and blinding in the morning sun. Mara's horse picked its way carefully over roots and rocks, following Caleb's lead through terrain that would kill them if they made a wrong turn. The settlement appeared after 2 hours. A cluster of wooden buildings huddled in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys in thin gray columns. It was bigger than Mara expected, maybe 30 structures total, with a main street that ran straight through the center. She could see a general store, a blacksmith, what looked like a saloon, and at the far end, a small church with a crooked steeple. That's where we're going, Caleb said, nodding toward the church. They dismounted outside, tying the horses to a post. Mara's legs felt unsteady beneath her. Her heart hammered against her ribs hard enough to hurt. The church door stood open. Inside, a man was sweeping the floor, thin and gray-haired, wearing spectacles that caught the light when he looked up. Caleb Rowe. The preacher's voice carried surprise and something else. Wariness, maybe. Didn't expect to see you in town. Reverend Marsh, Caleb removed his hat. We need your services. The Reverend's gaze shifted to Mara, assessing. What kind of services? Marriage. Caleb's tone left no room for discussion. Today. Now, if possible. Reverend Marsh set down his broom slowly. You're asking me to marry you to a woman I've never met, with no announcement, no preparation, no... Yes. Caleb, I can't just... There are procedures. The territorial office requires documentation, witnesses, time to verify. How much time? Minimum 3 days to post the intention, allow for objections. We don't have 3 days. Caleb pulled papers from his coat. These are legal. Marriage contract, signed and ready. All we need is your signature and your testimony that you witnessed the vows. The Reverend took the papers, reading them carefully. His expression shifted as he read, something like understanding dawning in his eyes. This is about a legal dispute, he said quietly. Yes. With the woman's husband? Former husband. If you do this... Reverend Marsh looked at Mara. Ma'am, are you entering this marriage of your own free will? No coercion, no duress? Mara's voice came out steady. I am. And you understand that marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered lightly or dissolved on a whim? I understand. The Reverend studied them both for a long moment. Then he sighed, folding the papers. Victor Hale came through here yesterday, told everyone he was looking for his missing wife and children, painted quite the picture of himself as a concerned husband. Mara's stomach dropped. What did he say? That you'd taken the children and run off with another man. That you'd always be an unstable, prone to melancholy and poor judgment. That he feared for the children's safety in your care. The Reverend's gaze sharpened. Is any of that true? No. The word came out harsh. He abandoned us, sold everything we had and disappeared. I took the children and ran because Stain would have killed us. Can you prove it? Can he prove his version? Caleb interjected. Because I was there when she arrived half frozen with 3 children on the edge of death. I was there when she worked herself sick to keep them fed and safe, and I'll testify to that in any court that asks. Reverend Marsh was quiet for a moment. Then he said, There are people in this town who remember what happened to your sister Caleb, people who remember what you said to them afterward. I remember too. You called them murderers, said they had blood on their hands for not opening their doors. I was grieving and angry, and I meant every word. Caleb's voice was hard. But I'm not here to relitigate the past. I'm here to protect this woman and her children from a man who sees them as property. So I'm asking, are you going to help us, or do we need to ride another 20 miles to find someone who will? The Reverend looked between them, weighing something Mara couldn't name. Finally, he nodded. I'll do it, but not because of threats or coercion. He met Mara's eyes. I'll do it because I've been a pastor for 30 years, and I know the difference between a woman running from danger and a woman running from responsibility. You're the former, Mrs. Hale. Anyone with eyes can see it. Relief flooded through Mara so completely she had to grip the pew beside her to stay standing. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. Victor Hale has friends in the territorial office. This marriage will buy you time, but it won't guarantee victory. Reverend Marsh gestured toward the altar. Come on then. Let's make this legal before anyone decides to interfere. They stood before the altar, Mara in her worn dress and shawl, Caleb in his work clothes and gun belt. It wasn't how Mara had imagined getting married the first time, full of hope and young enough to believe in fairy tales. And it certainly wasn't how she'd imagined a second marriage, if she'd ever imagined one at all. But when Caleb took her hand, his grip was warm and steady. And when the Reverend began speaking, the words felt less like a performance and more like a promise. Marriage is a covenant, Reverend Marsh said, a sacred bond between two people who choose to face the world together. It requires trust, sacrifice, and the willingness to put another's welfare above your own. Caleb Rowe, Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To protect and provide for her? To honor her choices and to stand by her in adversity? I do. Caleb's voice was absolutely certain. Marahale, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? To trust him with your welfare and that of your children? To honor his sacrifices and to stand by him in adversity? Mara looked at Caleb, at the man who'd opened his door in a storm, who'd walked through snowdrifts to save Ruth, who'd offered everything he had to keep them safe. I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Marsh signed the papers with swift, efficient strokes. May this bond serve you well in the trials ahead. It was done. That simply, that quickly, Mara Whitfield became Mara Rowe. Caleb pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, too large for her finger, clearly not made for this purpose. It was my mother's, he said quietly, sliding it onto her finger and folding her hand closed around it to keep it from falling off. I'll get it sized properly when we have time. Mara stared at the ring, emotion closing her throat. Caleb, we need witnesses, Reverend Marsh interrupted. 2 people to sign these papers and testify that this marriage occurred willingly and legally. I'll find them, Caleb said. He walked to the church door and stepped outside. Mara heard him call to someone, his voice carrying across the street. A moment later, 2 women appeared, one elderly, one middle-aged, both wearing expressions of open curiosity. Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Chen, Caleb said, I need witnesses for a marriage contract. The elderly woman, Mrs. Patterson, peered at Mara with sharp eyes. This is the woman Victor Hale was asking about. Yes. He said she was unfit, unstable. He lied. Mrs. Chen stepped closer, studying Mara's face. You're the one who walked through the blizzard with 3 children. Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. I heard about that. My husband saw tracks coming down from the high country, said it was a miracle anyone survived that storm. Mrs. Chen looked at Caleb. She stayed with you all winter? Yes. And the children? Safe, healthy, better than when they arrived. Mrs. Patterson made a considering sound. Victor Hale has always been too smooth for my taste. Pretty words, but his eyes are mean. I told my husband I didn't believe his story about the unstable wife. Will you sign? Caleb asked. Both women looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. Then Mrs. Patterson nodded. We'll sign. But understand this, Caleb Rowe. If you're doing this to spite Victor Hale, without caring about this woman's welfare, the whole town will know it. We don't take kindly to men who play games with women's lives. This isn't a game, Caleb said quietly. This is protection. That's all. Mrs. Chen studied his face. You always were too serious for your own good, even before Caroline died. She turned to Mara. He's a good man, despite his temper. Hard, but fair. He'll keep his word if he gives it. I know, Mara said. The women signed the papers. Reverend Marsh added his seal, and just like that, the marriage was legal and witnessed. Mara Rowe, legally married to Caleb Rowe, with documentation that would be filed with the territorial office by day's end. Victor won't take this well, Mrs. Patterson warned. He expected to walk in here and reclaim his property like picking up a parcel at the post office. Let him be angry, Caleb replied. Anger without law on his side is just noise. The law is complicated where children are concerned, Reverend Marsh cautioned. Paternal rights are strong, even when the father is questionable. This marriage helps your case, but it doesn't guarantee victory if Victor pushes this to court. We understand. Mara's voice was stronger now, but it's a start. They left the church as husband and wife, papers filed, witnesses secured, everything legal and binding. The ride back to the cabin felt different somehow, not easier, but more solid, as if the ground beneath them had become more certain. Thank you, Mara said as they climbed back up the mountain trail. For all of it. The ring, the marriage, everything. We're not safe yet. I know, but we're safer than we were yesterday. Caleb glanced at her. How do you feel? About being married to you? Yes? Mara considered the question honestly. Strange. Like I put on someone else's clothes and they almost fit. But not wrong, not frightening. She touched the ring on her finger. How do you feel? Like I just jumped off a cliff and I'm not sure if I'll fly or fall. That's marriage, Mara said wryly. Is it? In my limited experience, yes. They rode in silence for a while. Then Caleb said, I meant what I said in there about protection, about keeping you safe. I know you did. But I want you to understand something. He pulled his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully. This marriage, it's real, legally binding, and I don't take that lightly. I won't demand anything from you, your body, your affection, any of it. But I also won't lie and say this is temporary. Not while Victor's out there. Not while the children need stability. Mara met his gaze. What are you saying? I'm saying this isn't a performance. It's a commitment, for as long as it needs to be. His jaw tightened. Maybe that makes me a fool. Maybe I'm setting myself up for the same kind of loss that destroyed me before. But I can't do this halfway. I'm not built for it. Understanding bloomed in Mara's chest. He was afraid, not of Victor, not of violence or legal battles, but of caring too much, of letting himself believe in something that might be ripped away. I understand, she said quietly, and I won't. I won't take advantage of what you're offering, but I also won't pretend this is simple, because it's not. It's complicated and messy and possibly the most reckless thing either of us has ever done. Probably. But it's also... She searched for words. It's also the first time in 8 years that I felt like someone was on my side. Really, truly on my side. Not out of obligation or pity, but because they chose to be. Caleb's expression softened fractionally. I chose. I know. And I'll keep choosing, every day, until this is resolved one way or another. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't poetry or romance or any of the things that were supposed to come with marriage. But it was real and honest. And for Mara, who'd spent years drowning in Victor's beautiful lies, honesty felt like oxygen. Then we're partners, she said. Really, truly partners. Partners, Caleb agreed. They rode on, husband and wife by law and choice, heading back toward a cabin that now held more than survival. It held something fragile and precious and worth defending. It held hope. When they arrived, Samuel burst out the door before they'd even dismounted. Did it work? Are you married? We're married, Mara confirmed. So Papa Victor can't take us? Not as easily as he thought. Caleb swung down from his horse. But we're not out of danger yet. He'll be back tomorrow, and he won't be happy. Ruth appeared with Grace in her arms. Are you really Mr. Caleb now, or do we call you Papa? The question made Caleb freeze. He looked at Mara, clearly uncertain how to answer. That's up to Mr. Caleb, Mara said carefully. But either way, he's family now, legally and truly. Can I call you Papa? Ruth asked, looking up at Caleb with hopeful eyes. I want to, if you don't mind. Caleb crouched down to her level. His voice came out rough. I don't mind. Ruth threw her free arm around his neck. Grace squished between them, and Samuel joined the embrace with the fierce loyalty of a boy who'd been waiting his whole life for a father who deserved the name. Mara watched them, her heart too full for words. This wasn't how she'd imagined family. But maybe family was never about perfection. Maybe it was about people who chose each other in spite of everything, who stood together when the world tried to tear them apart. That night, they prepared for battle. Not with weapons, though Caleb cleaned his rifle and checked his ammunition, but with testimony, with facts, with the kind of evidence that would make Victor's lies impossible to maintain. We need people to speak for us, Caleb said. Witnesses who can testify to your character and the children's welfare. Who would do that? We've been isolated all winter. Reverend Marsh, Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chen, they'll speak. Caleb paced the cabin. And I can get others. People who know me, who know I wouldn't risk everything for nothing. Victor has witnesses too, Mara reminded him. People from Denver who'll say whatever he pays them to say. Then we make sure our truth is stronger than his lies. Samuel looked up from where he was helping Ruth pack a small bag, just in case they needed to run. What if it's not enough? What if the law says we have to go anyway? Caleb stopped pacing. He looked at the three children, at Mara, at the life they'd built in this small cabin against impossible odds. Then we make it enough, he said, whatever it takes. Mara understood what he meant, what he was willing to do if legal means failed. Part of her should have been horrified by the implication, but mostly she felt grateful that someone was finally willing to fight as hard for her children as she was. They stayed up late, going over every detail. What to say if Victor arrived with the marshal? How to present the marriage as legitimate rather than desperate? Which arguments to use, which to avoid? Caleb was thorough, methodical, approaching the confrontation like a military campaign. You've done this before, Mara observed, planned for conflict. I was a soldier before I came here, before Caroline died. He didn't elaborate, and Mara didn't push. There would be time for stories later, if they survived tomorrow. When they finally slept, Mara took the bed with the children as usual, and Caleb took his chair by the fire. But sometime in the night, she woke to find him standing at the window, silhouetted against moonlight, watching the trail for approaching riders. Can't sleep? She asked quietly. Too much riding on tomorrow. Mara slipped out of bed and joined him at the window. Outside, the world was silver and black, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. You don't seem scared. I'm good at hiding it. He glanced at her. But I am. Terrified, actually. That we've done all this and it won't be enough. That Victor will find some loophole, some legal trick that undoes everything. And if he does, then we run, all of us, north to Montana or west to Oregon, somewhere beyond territorial jurisdiction. That's desertion, kidnapping, legally. I know. His voice was flat. But I'll take wanted and alive over legal and destroyed. Mara leaned against the window frame. How did we get here? A month ago, I didn't know you existed, and now you're talking about throwing away your whole life to protect my children. They're not just your children anymore. Caleb turned to face her fully. The moment I signed those papers, they became mine too, in the eyes of the law and my own conscience. I don't know how to be a father, but I know how to fight, and I know what's worth fighting for. They're lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one. The admission seemed to cost him something. I was dying up here. Slowly, quietly, but dying all the same. And then you knocked, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to care about something beyond just surviving the next day. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. Caleb, I'm not saying this for gratitude or sympathy. I'm saying it so you understand. This isn't sacrifice for me. It's salvation. Those children saved me as much as I saved them. She reached for his hand, the one that wore no ring but had committed to everything anyway. Then we save each other. All of us. Together. His fingers closed around hers. Together. They stood like that until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Two people bound by law and choice and something deeper than either could name yet. And when the sun finally rose on the day Victor would return, they were ready. Not certain of victory, but ready to fight with everything they had, because some things were worth dying for. And family, real family, chosen family, was at the top of that list. Victor arrived at noon with twice as many men as before. Mara counted 6 riders coming up the trail, their horses kicking up snow that caught the sunlight like thrown diamonds. She recognized the scarred man and the thin one from before, but the others were new, harder looking, the kind of men who got paid to intimidate. Stay inside with the children, Caleb said, checking his rifle one last time. No matter what happens, you stay inside. I should be out there with you. You will be. When the time's right. He touched her face briefly, a gesture that was becoming familiar. Trust me. Mara nodded, though fear sat like lead in her stomach. She gathered Samuel, Ruth, and Grace into the back room, the same place they'd hidden 2 days ago. But this time felt different. This time they had law on their side, fragile as it was. Through the window, she watched Caleb step onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. He looked like what he was, a man who'd survived violence and wouldn't hesitate to return to it if necessary. Victor dismounted with theatrical flair, smiling like this was a social call. Caleb Rowe, I see you're still playing protector. I see you brought an army to collect your wife and children. Insurance, in case you decided to be difficult. Victor's eyes swept the cabin, searching. Where is she? Where are my children? Your children are with their mother, where they belong. Their mother is my wife, which makes them my property until she decides otherwise. Victor pulled out the same legal writ from before. I have the law on my side, mountain man. The territorial marshal himself signed this. Now bring them out before this gets unpleasant. Interesting thing about that writ, Caleb said conversationally. It's based on Mara being your wife, your legal spouse with no competing claim. Victor's smile thinned. What are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that as of yesterday morning, Mara is no longer Mara Hale. She's Mara Rowe, my wife, legally married, properly witnessed, and filed with the territorial office. The silence that followed was absolute. Victor's expression went through several shifts, confusion, disbelief, fury, before settling on something cold and calculating. That's impossible. Marriage requires time, documentation, announcement of intent, all of which we provided. Reverend Marsh performed the ceremony. Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chen witnessed it. The papers are filed and legal. Caleb's voice remained steady. Which means your writ is meaningless. You have no legal claim over another man's wife or her children. Victor's hand moved toward his gun. 3 of his men shifted, ready to follow his lead. But Caleb didn't flinch, didn't raise his rifle. He just stood there, patient as stone. You married her. Victor's voice was soft, dangerous. You married my wife. Your former wife. She's mine now. This is fraud, a sham marriage designed to circumvent the law. Prove it, Caleb interrupted. Prove in court that our marriage isn't legitimate. Take it before a judge and explain why your abandoned wife shouldn't be allowed to remarry. See how far your legal claims get you when every witness testifies that you left her and 3 children to die in a blizzard. Victor's jaw clenched. You don't know what you're dealing with. I have connections, friends in Denver who'll do what? Force a woman to return to a man who abandoned her? Separate legally protected children from their mother and stepfather? Caleb's expression hardened. Go ahead and try. But understand this. You take this to court, and every ugly truth about what you did comes out. Every witness, every detail. Is your reputation worth that? The standoff stretched between them, 6 armed men against 1. But the numbers didn't seem to matter. Caleb held position like a man who'd already decided what he was willing to die for. Finally, the scarred man spoke. Victor, maybe we should reconsider. Shut up. Victor's voice cracked like a whip. He stared at the cabin, at the closed door where Mara was hiding with the children he'd come to reclaim. Then his gaze swung back to Caleb. I want to speak with her, face to face, without you standing there playing guard dog. No. She was my wife for 8 years. I have a right. You have no rights. Not anymore. You gave them up when you sold her house and disappeared. I want to hear her say it. Victor's tone shifted, became almost pleading. I want to hear her tell me she chose this, that she married you willingly, because I don't believe it. I think you coerced her, threatened her, forced her into this sham. The door opened. Mara stepped out onto the porch, and every man's attention snapped to her. She'd changed into the one good dress she owned, the blue one that had been her mother's. Her hair was braided simply, and she wore Caleb's too large ring on her finger where everyone could see it. I'll tell you myself, she said clearly. I married Caleb Rowe of my own free will. No coercion, no threats, just choice. Victor's expression shifted, something almost like genuine emotion flickering across his face. Mara, sweetheart, you don't have to do this. Whatever he's told you, whatever threats he's made no threats. He's offered only protection. From what? From me? I'm your husband. You were my husband. Past tense. Mara's voice was steady, strong. You were my husband when you drank away our savings. When you hit Samuel for dropping a plate. When you locked Ruth in the cellar for crying. When you disappeared the day after Grace was born and took everything we had with you. That's not, I was trying to provide. You were gambling, and drinking, and sleeping with women in Denver while your children went hungry." The words came out like bullets, each one finding its mark. "Don't stand there and pretend you were some devoted husband who had to leave for work. You ran. You abandoned us. And then when you realized you couldn't come crawling back without looking like a failure, you invented this story about me being unstable." Victor's face flushed. "I have witnesses who will testify to what? To lies you paid them to tell?" Mara stepped forward, and Caleb moved with her, a solid presence at her side. "I have witnesses too. Real ones. People who saw me arrive half frozen with 3 dying children. People who watched me work myself sick to keep them safe. People who know the difference between a woman running from danger and a woman running from responsibility." "You can't do this." Victor's voice rose, losing its careful control. "You can't just... You're my wife, the mother of my children. You belong to me. I belong to myself, and my children belong with me, not with a man who sees them as property to be reclaimed when convenient." Victor looked at his men, at Caleb's unwavering stance, at the closed door where his children were hidden. Mara watched him calculate the odds, measure the cost of forcing this issue versus walking away. "I could take this to court," he said finally. "Challenge the marriage, claim fraud, coercion, whatever it takes." "You could," Mara agreed, "and you'd lose, because every witness will testify to the truth, that you abandoned us, and I made the best choice I could to protect my children. No judge will side with you once they hear the facts. Facts can be shaped, presented differently. Then shape them. Present them however you want. But understand this, Victor. I will fight you with everything I have, and I won't be fighting alone anymore." Caleb's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing. The gesture was simple but unmistakable, united, unbreakable. Victor stared at their joined hands, something ugly twisting his features. "You think this mountain man will protect you? He's a hermit, a loner who couldn't even save his own sister. What makes you think he'll do better with you?" Caleb went very still. Mara felt his hand tighten around hers, felt the violence coiling in him like a spring under pressure. "Careful," Caleb said softly. "You're about 3 words away from dying on this mountain." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. One more word about Caroline and I'll gut you where you stand, law or no law." The scarred man shifted nervously. "Victor, we should go. This isn't worth..." "It's worth everything." But Victor's voice had lost its certainty. He looked at Mara one last time, searching for some crack in her resolve. "You're making a mistake. He'll hurt you or he'll leave, and you'll be alone again with 3 children and no prospects." "I'd rather be alone than with you," Mara replied simply. The words hung in the cold air like a verdict. Victor's face went white, then red, rage and humiliation warring across his features. "Fine." The word came out choked. "Keep the children, keep your new husband. But don't come crying to me when this all falls apart. Don't expect any help, any money, any..." "I expect nothing from you. I never did. That was always the problem." Victor mounted his horse with jerky, angry movements. His men followed, clearly relieved to be leaving. But before he could ride away, Ruth's voice came from the cabin doorway. "Goodbye, Papa Victor." Everyone turned. Ruth stood there, small and brave, holding Grace against her hip, while Samuel stood protectively at her side. She didn't look scared. She looked resolved. "I'm sorry you were sad," Ruth continued, "but we're happy here, with Mama and Papa Caleb, so you don't have to worry about us anymore." Victor stared at his daughter, at the child who'd once cried every time he raised his voice. "Ruth, it's okay if you don't love us. We have people who do now." Ruth's voice was gentle, almost kind. "You can go back to Denver and be happy too, without us." The dismissal in her small voice was devastating. Victor looked like he'd been physically struck. For a moment, Mara almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then she remembered the bruises on Samuel's arms, the terror in Ruth's eyes when doors closed, the way Grace had learned not to cry because crying only made things worse. Her sympathy died as quickly as it had sparked. "Leave," she said, "and don't come back." Victor's throat worked. He seemed to be searching for something to say, some final blow to land. But nothing came. He just turned his horse and rode down the trail, his hired men following in silence. They watched until the riders disappeared into the trees. Then Caleb's shoulders sagged slightly, tension bleeding out of him in visible waves. "Is it over?" Samuel asked quietly. "Not completely," Caleb replied. He could still file legal challenges, but he'd be fighting uphill now, and men like Victor don't fight battles they can't win. Mara pulled her children close, Grace between them, feeling the solid reality of their safety. "You were so brave," she told Ruth. "All of you. So brave." "I wasn't scared," Ruth said. "Not with Papa Caleb here." The name settled over them like a benediction. Papa Caleb. Not Mr. Caleb anymore. Not a stranger offering temporary shelter. But Papa. Father. Family. Caleb looked at the children with an expression Mara couldn't quite read. Wonder, maybe, and terror, and something fierce and protective. "Let's go inside," he said roughly. "It's cold out here." They filed back into the cabin, and Mara felt something shift as the door closed behind them. This wasn't temporary anymore. This wasn't survival. This was life, messy and complicated and real. That night, after the children were asleep, Caleb and Mara sat by the fire in exhausted silence. The confrontation had drained them both, adrenaline giving way to bone-deep weariness. "Do you think he'll really leave us alone?" Mara asked. "I think his pride is wounded enough that he won't want to risk public humiliation in court. But I'll keep watch, just in case." "You always keep watch." "Old habits." Caleb poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. "From the war, and from after Caroline died, I couldn't sleep without knowing what was coming in the dark." "How long were you a soldier?" 4 years, Union Army, mostly fighting in Tennessee and Virginia. I was good at it, the fighting, the strategy, all of it. Too good, probably. It made coming home harder. Why? Because I kept seeing threats everywhere, kept waiting for the next attack, the next betrayal. Caroline used to joke that I'd scared off half the settlement just by existing. His smile was sad. Turns out she was right. When she needed them most, they were too afraid to help. Mara reached for his hand. "That wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it? I made them afraid. I made them think of me as dangerous, unstable. So when Caroline came knocking in a storm, they saw her as an extension of that danger. They made their own choices, cruel, cowardly choices. Maybe, but I gave them the excuse." He turned to look at her. "I'm trying to be different now. With you, with the children. Trying to be the kind of man who builds things instead of breaking them. You are that man. You have been from the moment you opened your door. I threatened to kill Victor today, multiple times. In defense of children, that's not the same as casual violence." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I meant it, you know. If he'd pushed harder, if he'd tried to take them, I would have killed him. Without hesitation." "I know." "And that doesn't frighten you?" Mara considered the question honestly. "It should, probably, but no. It doesn't frighten me. Because I understand the difference between a man who uses violence to control and a man who uses it to protect. Victor was the former, you're the latter." "How can you be sure?" "Because I've seen you with Grace, with Ruth and Samuel. You're gentle with them, patient. You teach instead of commanding. You listen instead of dictating." She squeezed his hand. "That's not a violent man. That's a good man who's willing to be violent when necessary. There's a difference." Caleb stared into the fire, processing her words. "My whole life, I've tried to be one or the other, good or dangerous. I never considered I could be both. Everyone's both. The question is which one you choose to lead with. And which one do I lead with? Good. Always good. The danger only comes out when someone threatens what you love." The word hung between them. Love. Mara hadn't meant to say it, but now that it was out there, she couldn't take it back. "I don't know how to love people without destroying them," Caleb said quietly. "I loved my sister and she died. I loved the men in my unit and watched them get cut down. I loved the idea of a home, a community, and I burned that to the ground with my anger. So you stopped loving, stopped letting yourself care. It seemed safer. For who? For everyone." He met her eyes. But then you knocked on my door and suddenly safe didn't matter as much as necessary. Mara felt her throat tighten. The children need you, I need you, but we need you whole, Caleb, not locked away behind walls you built to survive grief. I don't know how to tear those walls down. One day at a time, one choice at a time, she shifted closer, their shoulders touching. Let yourself care about us. Really care, without holding back or preparing for loss. We're here. We're real. And we're not going anywhere. You can't promise that. I can promise I'll try. That we'll all try. That's all anyone can do. Caleb was silent for a long time. Then he said, I'm terrified of you. Mara blinked. What? Of you. Of what you make me feel. I've spent 12 years building a life that can't hurt me, and you walked in and destroyed it in a matter of weeks. You and those children, you made me care again, made me hope. And hope is the most dangerous thing in the world. Why? Because hope means you have something to lose, and I've lost enough for one lifetime. Mara turned to face him fully. So have I. Victor took 8 years of my life. He took my dignity, my safety, my belief that I deserved better, and I survived it. Not unscathed, but I survived. And now I'm here, married to a man I barely know, betting everything on the possibility that this time, I chose right. What if you didn't? What if I did? She touched his face, feeling the rough texture of his beard beneath her palm. What if this messy, desperate, absolutely insane decision turns out to be the best thing either of us has ever done? Caleb's hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his cheek. You really believe that? I'm starting to. Something shifted in his expression. Walls cracking, hope bleeding through. I don't know how to be a husband, a father. I don't know how to be what you need. Neither do I, but we can learn together. What if I fail? What if I... Then we pick ourselves up and try again. That's what family does. The word landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Family. Not a temporary arrangement, not a legal fiction, but real chosen family. I never thought I'd have this again, Caleb admitted. Family. People who stay. We're staying. All of us. For as long as you'll have us. Forever, then. Mara smiled despite the tears burning in her eyes. Forever sounds good. They sat together in the firelight, two broken people learning how to be whole again. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Inside, 3 children slept peacefully, dreaming of safety that was finally real. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, the future felt like something worth planning for. Not easy. Not perfect. But possible. And sometimes, possible was enough. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Mara was making breakfast when she heard horses on the trail, a sound that still made her heart race with fear. But Caleb looked out the window and relaxed. It's Reverend Marsh and the women from town. Sure enough, 3 riders appeared. The Reverend, Mrs. Patterson, and Mrs. Chen. They dismounted and approached the cabin with careful respect, not barging in but waiting to be invited. Caleb opened the door. Reverend, ladies, this is unexpected. We heard about yesterday, Reverend Marsh said, about Victor Hale's visit and his departure. We wanted to make sure everyone was all right. We're fine. May we come in? Caleb glanced at Mara, who nodded. They filed inside, bringing cold air and the smell of pine with them. Ruth immediately hid behind Mara's skirts, while Samuel watched the visitors with wary eyes. Mrs. Patterson's gaze swept the cabin. The neat interior, the children's handmade toys, the evidence of a family making do with what they had. Victor Hale came through town last night, drunk and furious. He was telling anyone who'd listen that you stole his wife and children. He's lying, Mara said firmly. We know. Mrs. Chen stepped forward. That's why we're here, to offer testimony, if it comes to that, to make sure everyone in the settlement knows the truth about what happened. You'd do that? Mara asked, stunned. Child, we've lived long enough to know the difference between a man who protects and a man who possesses. Mrs. Patterson's voice was firm. What you did, leaving him, protecting your children, that took courage. And what Caleb did, opening his home, marrying you to shield you legally, that took integrity. We won't stand by and let Victor Hale rewrite that story." Reverend Marsh nodded. "I've already sent word to the territorial marshal. Explain the situation, the marriage, the circumstances. If Victor tries to file legal challenges, he'll find the path much more difficult than he anticipated." Caleb's expression was carefully neutral, but Mara saw the surprise in his eyes. "Why are you helping us?" "Because it's right," Reverend Marsh said simply. "And because 12 years ago, we failed someone who needed help. We let fear guide us instead of compassion. I won't make that mistake again." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken history. Caleb's jaw worked, emotion flickering across his face too fast to name. "Thank you," he said finally, the words rough. It means more than you know." Mrs. Chen smiled. "We brought supplies. Food, some clothes for the children, fabric for Mara. Consider it a wedding gift." They unloaded packages from their saddlebags, practical things, necessities wrapped in the kind of care that spoke to community rather than charity. Ruth emerged from behind Mara's skirts to examine a doll that Mrs. Patterson had brought, her eyes wide with wonder. "She's beautiful," Ruth whispered. "She was my daughter's. She'd want another little girl to have her now." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. "You take good care of her, you hear?" Ruth nodded solemnly, clutching the doll like treasure. Before the visitors left, Reverend Marsh pulled Caleb aside. Mara couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Caleb's posture change, saw something ease in his shoulders that had been tight for years. When the Reverend rode away with the two women, Caleb stood on the porch watching them go, his expression distant. "What did he say?" Mara asked, joining him. "He apologized. For 12 years ago. For the doors that stayed closed." Caleb's voice was thick. "He said Caroline would be proud of who I've become." Mara slipped her hand into his. "She would be. I spent so long being angry, at them, at myself, at the world, and now they're here, helping, and I don't know what to do with that. You forgive, and you let yourself be part of a community again. It's not that simple. It never is, but it's a start." Caleb looked down at their joined hands, at the too large ring on her finger that somehow felt exactly right. "When this started, when you knocked on my door, I thought I was doing you a favor, offering shelter to people who needed it. You were. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being a favor and started being—" He searched for words. "Started being the thing I needed. You saved me as much as I saved you." Mara leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then we're even." "No." His arm came around her waist, solid and sure. "We're family, and family is never even. It's everything." Spring came late to the mountains that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought transformation. The snow began its slow retreat, revealing earth that had been frozen for months. Ice cracked and fell from the cabin's eaves in the warming afternoons, and inside the small home that had sheltered them through winter's worst, the Rowe family began to understand what they'd become. Mara woke one morning to find Caleb's side of the bed empty. Over the past month, he'd stopped sleeping in the chair by the fire. At first, he'd taken the floor near the door, still keeping watch but closer. Then, gradually, hesitantly, he'd begun sharing the bed, always on top of the covers at first, maintaining careful distance. But cold nights and Grace's habit of crawling between them in the dark had slowly dissolved those boundaries until they slept like any married couple, close and comfortable in the darkness. She found him outside with Samuel, teaching the boy how to repair the winter damage to the goat pen. Samuel's hands were careful on the tools, his movements mimicking Caleb's with the devoted attention of a son learning from his father. "You've got to set the post deep," Caleb was saying. "Otherwise, the first storm will knock it down again. Here, like this." He guided Samuel's hands, showing him how to pack the earth tight. Ruth sat nearby, weaving grass into crowns for herself and Grace, who babbled happily in the sunshine. The baby had grown so much since that first terrible night. She was pulling herself up on furniture now, taking tentative steps while holding on to anything stable enough to support her. Mara leaned against the doorframe, watching her family with something that felt dangerously close to complete happiness. It was a fragile feeling, one she didn't quite trust yet, but it was there, growing stronger every day. "Mama, look," Ruth called out, holding up her grass crown. "I made one for you, too." Mara crossed to her daughter and let Ruth place the woven circle on her head, the gesture so tender and ordinary it made her throat tight. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." "You're beautiful," Ruth replied simply. "You look happy. You didn't used to look happy." The observation was innocent but devastating. Mara pulled her daughter close. "I am happy, here, with all of you." "Because of Papa Caleb?" "Because of all of it. The safety, the peace, the way we can just be ourselves without being afraid." Samuel looked up from his work. "Do you think Papa Victor will ever come back?" The question still had power, even after weeks without any sign of Victor. Caleb straightened, considering his answer carefully. "I don't think so. Men like him don't fight battles they can't win, and he knows he can't win this one." Caleb's voice was confident but gentle. "But if he does come back, we'll be ready, all of us." "I'm not scared of him anymore," Samuel said. "Not like I used to be." "Why not?" "Because last time I was alone. But now I have you, and Mama, and Ruth, and Grace. We're stronger together." Caleb's expression shifted, pride in something deeper, more paternal. He ruffled Samuel's hair affectionately. "That's exactly right. We're stronger together." The sound of approaching horses made everyone freeze. Mara's first instinct was still fear, and she saw the same reaction in her children. But Caleb held up a calming hand. "It's all right. That's just one rider, and I know the horse." He squinted down the trail. "It's Reverend Marsh." The Reverend arrived looking travel-worn but pleased. He dismounted with the stiffness of someone who'd ridden a long distance and accepted the cup of water Mara offered gratefully. "I have news," he said without preamble. "Victor Hale left Denver 3 days ago, headed east toward St. Louis. Word is he got into debt with some men who don't forgive easily, and he decided discretion was the better part of valor." Mara felt something unlock in her chest. "He's gone? Truly gone?" "Seems so. More than that, he signed papers in Denver before he left, legal documents relinquishing all paternal rights and claims to the children. My contact in the territorial office sent them by fast courier." The Reverend pulled folded papers from his coat. "It's official. He has no legal standing to ever take them back." The papers felt like deliverance in Mara's hands. She read them twice, making sure they were real, that Victor's signature was genuine. When she looked up, tears were streaming down her face. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." Caleb read over her shoulder, his body solid and warm at her back. "Why would he sign these? He fought so hard to claim them." "My understanding is that his creditors were looking for leverage. Threatening his family was one option. By officially severing ties, he removed that leverage. Cowardly, but practical from his perspective." Reverend Marsh's tone was dry. "I suspect he told himself it was for their protection. But regardless of his reasoning, the result is the same. Those children are legally free of him." Ruth had been listening carefully. "Does that mean Papa Caleb can really be our papa, not just pretend?" "If he wants to adopt you formally, yes. With your mother's permission, of course." All 3 children turned to look at Caleb with identical expressions of hope. Grace, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, reached for him with both arms, her baby voice forming sounds that almost sounded like "Papa." Caleb crouched down so he was eye level with Samuel and Ruth. "Is that what you want? For me to be your father legally? Not just because we live together or because I married your mother, but really, officially, your father?" "Yes," Samuel said immediately. "Please," Ruth added, clutching her grass crown. "We already call you Papa. We just want it to be real." "It is real," Caleb said gently. "It's been real since the moment I decided I'd rather die than let anyone hurt you. But if you want the papers too, if you want my name," his voice caught, "I'd be honored." Mara was crying openly now. She'd never expected this. Never imagined that the desperate gamble of a winter marriage could transform into something so genuine, so wanted by everyone involved. "There's more," Reverend Marsh said quietly. The territorial office received your marriage certificate and the circumstances surrounding it. They were impressed, I suppose you'd say, by your willingness to protect a woman and children in need, by the community support you gathered. There's talk of appointing you as a deputy marshal for this region, someone to help keep order in the high country settlements. Caleb looked stunned. After everything I said 12 years ago, after the way I left? People remember the anger, but they also remember why you were angry, and they've seen what you've built here. A family, a home, the kind of stability these territories need. The Reverend smiled. It's not a guaranteed position, but it's an offer worth considering. I don't know if I'm the right man for that kind of responsibility. You opened your door in a blizzard when most men would have stayed inside where it was safe. You stood up to an armed group to protect children who weren't legally yours yet. You rebuilt bridges with a community you'd burned. Reverend Marsh's expression was serious. That sounds like exactly the kind of man we need. After the Reverend left, Mara and Caleb sat on the porch while the children played in the emerging grass. The papers sat between them: Victor's relinquishment, the adoption forms, the letter about the marshal position, evidence of a future they'd never planned but somehow arrived at anyway. This is happening fast, Caleb said. Too fast, maybe. Are you having second thoughts? About you? About them? Never. He turned to face her. But about whether I'm capable of being what you need. That still scares me. What do you think we need? Stability, safety, someone who won't break under pressure. We have all of that. You've given us all of that. Mara took his hand, the gesture as natural now as breathing. But what I think we really need, what I know I need, is someone who sees us, really sees us, not as obligations or responsibilities, but as people worth choosing every single day. I do choose you, all of you. I know, that's why this works. She squeezed his hand. But I need to know, is this what you want? Really want? Not just for us, but for yourself. Because if we're going to make this permanent, if we're going to adopt the children and build a real life together, I need to know you're not just doing it out of duty. Caleb was quiet for a long time, watching Samuel show Ruth how to skip stones in the stream that ran behind the cabin. Grace was on a blanket nearby, gumming a wooden toy Caleb had carved. When Caroline died, he finally said, I convinced myself that caring about people was the problem. That if I just stopped caring, stopped letting anyone in, I'd never hurt that way again. And I was right. I didn't hurt. But I didn't feel anything else either. I was just existing, going through the motions of life without actually living. He turned to look at her, his eyes intense. And then you knocked on my door, and suddenly I was terrified and furious and protective and alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. You and those children, you broke through every wall I'd built, and I tried to tell myself it was temporary, that I was just helping until you could stand on your own. But somewhere around the time Ruth called me Papa, or Samuel asked if I was proud of him, or Grace grabbed my beard and laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world, his voice broke slightly. Somewhere in there, I stopped pretending this was temporary and started hoping it could be forever. So it's not duty, Mara said softly. It's everything. It's the reason I get up in the morning and the reason I can sleep at night. It's, you asked what I want for myself, and the answer is this: you, them. This family we've built out of desperation and hope. He pulled her closer. I want to adopt those children. I want to keep waking up next to you. I want to teach Samuel how to survive in these mountains and help Ruth learn to read and watch Grace take her first real steps. I want all of it, Mara, not because I should, because I can't imagine wanting anything else. Mara kissed him then, there on the porch with the children playing nearby and the spring sun warming the mountain air. It wasn't their first kiss. There had been a few tentative attempts over the past weeks, testing the waters of this marriage that had started as strategy. But this kiss was different. This kiss was promise and permanence, and the absolute certainty that what they had was worth protecting. When they broke apart, Ruth was staring at them with wide eyes. Does this mean you're really married now? Like, married? Mara laughed, her cheeks flushing. We've been married for almost 2 months, sweetheart. I know, but that was pretend married, for the papers.
This looks like real married. It's been real for a while now, Caleb said. We were just slow to figure it out. Samuel was grinning. So we're really a family? Forever? Forever, Caleb confirmed. If that's what you want.
All three children piled onto the porch in a tangle of limbs and laughter, Grace squealing with delight as her siblings swept her up in the chaos. Caleb caught them all, strong enough to hold the entire family, and Mara felt something settle deep in her chest. This was home. This was family. Not born, but chosen. Not perfect, but real. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The adoption papers were filed a week later. Caleb rode to the territorial office himself with Samuel beside him, the boy sitting tall in his saddle like he'd been born to mountains and horses. When they returned, Samuel was carrying official documents that declared him Samuel Rowe, son of Caleb and Mara Rowe, with all the legal rights and protections that entailed. Ruth's papers came next, then Grace's. Each ceremony was small but meaningful. Reverend Marsh presiding, the same witnesses who'd supported their marriage signing as testimony. The community that had once failed Caleb's sister now rallied to support the family he'd built from ruins. Mrs. Patterson brought a cake for Ruth's adoption. Mrs. Chen sewed new dresses for both girls. Other settlers Mara had never met appeared with gifts: a knife for Samuel's belt, boots that actually fit, a cradle for Grace that rocked without squeaking. "Why are they doing this, Mara asked Caleb one evening after another round of visitors had departed. "Because that's what communities do when they work right. They support each other. They show up." He stacked the gifts carefully. "And because they're trying to make amends for the past, for doors that stayed closed." "You've forgiven them." "I'm trying to. It's harder than I expected, letting go of anger I've carried for so long. But watching them welcome you, help the children, it makes it easier." "Caroline would be proud," Mara said softly. Caleb smiled, sad but genuine. "Yeah, she would." That night, after the children were asleep, Caleb presented Mara with a small box. Inside was a gold ring, sized properly this time, with an inscription inside: "Chosen, not born." "I couldn't resize my mother's ring without losing the original metalwork," he explained as he slid it onto her finger, removing the two large ones she'd been wearing. "So I had this made. If you don't like it, it's perfect." Mara held her hand up to the firelight, watching the gold catch and gleam. "Chosen, not born. That's exactly what we are. All of us." "All of us," she agreed. They made love that night for the first time, tender and nervous, and nothing like the practiced performance Mara had endured with Victor. This was exploration and trust and the slow building of something that felt almost sacred in its honesty. Afterward, they lay tangled together while the fire burned down to embers. "I was scared," Caleb admitted into the darkness, "that I wouldn't know how, that I'd hurt you or You didn't hurt me. You were perfect." "I don't know about perfect." "Perfect for me, then." Mara kissed his shoulder. "This, us, it's everything I didn't know I was allowed to want." "What do you mean?" "With Victor, everything was about what he wanted, what he needed. My job was to provide it and not complain. I learned to make myself small, quiet, convenient." She traced patterns on his chest. "But with you, I don't have to be small. You make space for me, for all of us. And that's more valuable than I can explain." Caleb pulled her closer. "You're not small. You're the strongest person I know. You walked through a blizzard. You chose your children over your own survival. You stood up to Victor when he came with armed men. That's not small. That's extraordinary. I was terrified every moment. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the thing anyway." He kissed her forehead. "You taught me that. You and the children. You taught me that love doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave enough to risk everything." Mara fell asleep in his arms, safe and warm and completely certain that this messy, imperfect, absolutely miraculous thing they'd built was worth every moment of fear it took to get here. Summer arrived with wildflowers and long days. Caleb accepted the deputy marshal position, which mostly meant riding circuit through the high settlements once a month,
checking in on isolated families and settling the occasional dispute. He always took Samuel with him now, teaching the boy the skills he'd need to survive these mountains. Ruth learned to read from a primer Mrs. Patterson provided, sounding out words with fierce concentration while Grace destroyed whatever wasn't nailed down. The baby was walking now, toddling after her siblings with determined steps and an infectious laugh. Mara expanded the garden, planting vegetables and herbs in neat rows.
She learned to make cheese from the goat's milk and began trading her goods in the settlement for things they needed. Women who'd been strangers became friends. She wasn't just Caleb's wife anymore. She was Mara, known for her sharp wit and generous spirit. The cabin felt smaller with all of them growing, so Caleb began building an addition, a real bedroom for him and Mara, leaving the main room for the children. Samuel helped with the construction, learning how to set beams and plane boards. The work was slow but satisfying, each nail driven a testament to permanence. One evening in late July, as the sun set gold over the mountains, the family gathered on the porch. Grace was asleep in Mara's arms. Ruth leaned against Caleb's side while Samuel whittled a piece of wood into something that might eventually be a bird. "Tell us a story, Papa," Ruth requested, "about when you were little." Caleb thought for a moment. "When I was about your age, my father took me fishing for the first time. I was so excited I barely slept the night before. But when we got to the river, I was afraid of the water. It was deeper and faster than I expected, and I thought I'd fall in and drown." "What did you do?" Samuel asked. "My father showed me that fear is just information. It tells you to be careful, not to give up. He taught me to respect the water but not let it control me. And by the end of that day, I'd caught 3 fish and learned that most things we're afraid of are just things we don't understand yet." "Like how I was afraid of you at first," Ruth said thoughtfully. "But then I learned you were nice." "Exactly like that." "Are you afraid of anything now?" Samuel asked. Caleb looked at Mara, at the children surrounding him, at the life they'd built. "I'm afraid of losing this, of somehow failing you all. But I'm more afraid of not trying than I am of failing." "You won't fail," Samuel said with absolute certainty. "You're the strongest person I know." "Besides Mama," Ruth added loyally. Caleb smiled. "Besides Mama." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. Somewhere down the mountain, a wolf howled, a sound that had once meant isolation, but now just meant wilderness, beautiful and vast and home. "What do you think happens next?" Mara asked softly. "What do you mean?" "For us, this family, where do we go from here?" Caleb considered the question. "I think we keep doing what we're doing. We grow the garden bigger. We finish the addition. We teach the children everything we know. We wake up every morning and choose each other again." "That's it? Just life?" "Just life," he agreed. "The ordinary, extraordinary work of being a family. No more running, no more fear. Just this." "I like the sound of that." "So do I." Ruth had fallen asleep against Caleb's side, her grass crown still on her head, though it was wilted now. Samuel's whittling had slowed, his eyes heavy with the kind of exhaustion that came from good work and fresh air. Grace stirred in Mara's arms, made a sleepy sound, and settled deeper. "We should get them to bed," Mara said. But neither of them moved yet. The moment was too perfect to rush, the family together, safe, the mountains standing watch around them like silent guardians. "Mara?" Caleb's voice was quiet. "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For knocking on my door, for trusting me, for giving me a reason to be more than just surviving." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting starlight. "For saving me." "We saved each other," Mara replied. "That's what family does." They carried the children inside one by one, tucking them into beds that smelled like pine and summer air. Grace went into her cradle without waking. Ruth curled up with her doll and her wilted crown. Samuel sprawled across his blankets, already dreaming of whatever boys his age dreamed about. In their own room, still new enough to feel like luxury, Mara and Caleb lay down together. His arm came around her waist, pulling her close. She fit against him perfectly now, all the sharp edges softened by familiarity. "I love you," she said into the darkness. It was the first time either of them had said it out loud. The words had been there for weeks, maybe months,
circling around them like birds waiting to land, but saying them felt important, like a final door opening. Caleb's arm tightened around her. I love you too. You and the children. My whole family. Your whole family, Mara agreed, smiling in the dark. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. An owl called, hunting in the moonlight. The mountains breathed their ancient rhythm, unchanged and unchanging.
And inside the cabin, the Rowe family slept peacefully, no longer strangers taking shelter from a storm, but something infinitely more precious. They were home. They were safe. They were loved. Not every family is born. Some are chosen in moments of desperation and forged through months of trust and sacrifice. Some families are built by people who've been broken and learned that broken things can still hold light if given the chance. The knock in the storm had changed everything. It had opened a door that led to this, to morning coffee and children's laughter and quiet evenings on the porch. To love that wasn't loud or dramatic, but steady and certain as the mountains themselves. Mara had walked through a blizzard with no guarantee of survival. Caleb had opened his door with no promise of redemption. And somehow, impossibly, they'd found both. They'd found each other. They'd found family. They'd found home. And in the end, that was worth every frozen step, every moment of fear, every risk they'd taken on hope. Because some things are worth fighting for, worth walking through storms for, worth opening doors in the darkness for. Family is one of those things. Always has been. Always will be. And as the Rowe family slept under the shelter of mountains and stars, the future stretched out before them, uncertain in its details but absolutely certain in what mattered most. They were together. They were choosing each other every single day, and that was everything. That was enough. That was home.